Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another Historical Humans podcast. My name's Justin Woods, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Colum Coleman. And today we are striking at the heartstrings of every historian in the past few hundred years, something we've all shed a tear for: the burning of the Library of Alexandria. Or just maybe the library, you know?
Yeah, the Library of Alexandria here is going to be, I think, our first real dip into sort of the mythologization of history. We're going to go through a lot of false accounts of how this place is destroyed, which is honestly pretty fun. The Library of Alexandria is one of the most famous structures in human history, uh, and its destruction is one of the most famous events in human history.
And it's
Uh,
said to have been one of the best and largest collections in the world. Its library collection held some of the greatest works of some of the most notable authors in history, a lot of ancient Greek works, a lot of fairly more modern Roman works, correct?
yes, its goal was to house every book, story, pamphlet, poetry, history, basically anything that had ever been written down by human hand in the Mediterranean was meant to be stored in the Library of Alexandria.
A
Uh,
repository of man's knowledge.
what makes the loss of the library even more alarming is that the library made a habit of collecting almost exclusively original copies.
Oh, oh.
Um, the library's copying practice, which we will get into because it does cause some interesting issues throughout the Mediterranean, was to take books, copy them, and return the newly written copy to the original owner, and keep the original, typically decade or centuries old work in the library itself as the library's reference.
Interesting. I,
This has consequences for people.
I mean, I get it. I understand that at a certain point they want it to be in the hands of an educational institute. But, ooh, to just hand back a brand new copy and go, here you go. Thanks. That's the cost.
Yeah. The idea, the idea is like, I agreed you can make copies, and we did. We never said we were going to return the books.
That's a bold acquisition strategy, but who's going to stop them?
Yeah, they are backed by the pharaohs of Egypt, which for a time here are, especially during the height of the library's power, are basically the most powerful people in the Mediterranean. They do start getting overshadowed by the Romans later on, but like they are a powerhouse, like for most of the time.
Well, the Romans do make a pop in here at a point, but
Oh
not to
yes, the
foreshadow
Romans.
too much.
Yeah, the Roman superior. So anyway, Library of Alexandria uh, is widely regarded as the largest and most well collected library of the ancient world. It was located in Alexandria, Egypt, and it was established there during the reign of Ptolemy II, who ruled from 282 to 246 BCE. Now, Ptolemy II did not have this idea for a grand library. What he was in fact doing was enacting the will of his father, Ptolemy I, who was the founder of the Ptolemaic dynasty. And Ptolemy I claimed that the mandate he had issued for the construction of a great library in the city of Alexandria wasn't even his idea. Uh, you see, Ptolemy is trying to gain legitimacy for himself and for his dynasty, since he is the first member of said dynasty. So his claim for building the library as this great public work for the people of Alexandria and the people of Egypt uh, is to say that he is enacting the will of the previous pharaoh, Alexander the Great.
He was
Uh,
technically pharaoh, or I, I
Alexander the Great was crowned as king of Macedon, commander of all Greeks, uh, what was it? Satrap of all Persia, and pharaoh of Egypt.
wow. Is
Uh,
he the first non-Egyptian pharaoh?
No, there are a number of Persian pharaohs, such as the man he kills for the spot, Darius.
Okay, interesting. I did not
Yeah.
know he was
Uh,
technically uh,
yeah,
pharaoh.
he was technically crowned pharaoh. What Egypt liked to do was they had separate coronation ceremonies, which Alexander went through, but the Egyptian crown was already a merged crown from the upper and lower Nile crowns. So they basically just, for a time, tacked that on to becoming, emperor of Persia. That was just, you had to go to Egypt, pay some lip service to their gods, wear a fancy hat for a day, and you were declared God King of Egypt and could rule them with whatever will you liked.
Interesting. You know, to a degree, I kind of respect it because there's some cultural like acknowledgement in that. Like you're
Yeah,
following along their traditions, you're following along with their culture. I
yeah,
I do respect it just a
yeah,
little bit.
yeah. You get presented with like a golden scarab that some of the Persian pharaohs would melt down to pay for other projects elsewhere.
Oh,
Uh, which is why when Alexander goes to Egypt, he wins it fairly easily and is readily crowned pharaoh of Egypt, despite most of Persia still existing independent of him. They not happy. But anyway, so Alexander is a popular pharaoh in Egypt. He is considered Alexander the Great, and Ptolemy, who is trying to claim, despite having no genetic relationship with Alexander the Great, to be his heir. So he's saying, "Of course I'm his heir. I'm here to build this great library for all of Egypt that Alexander wanted." And then he kicks the can down the road to his son.
I mean, it's a city named after Alexander himself. You
Yeah.
have to pay some good homage. You have to make it quite a big notion. I mean, what other grander notion is there than a house of knowledge?
Yeah. Additionally, uh, additionally, at this time when we were trying to establish the Library of Alexandria and the ideas first being presented, uh, the empire Alexander the Great ruled has broken down into massive multi-faction civil war that will continue to rage for generations. So, you really need to establish legitimacy and do so very prominently. And a massive library in the city of Alexander is how the Ptolemies go about doing this. Um, and the Ptolemies really do commit to it during the first half of their dynasty. It's a major patronage project for the Ptolemies. If you want to show that you are the rightful successor to the previous Ptolemy on the throne, because guess what? Everyone's named Ptolemy in this dynasty. That's why it's called the Ptolemaic dynasty. It's named after just everyone who has ever sat the throne in it, more or less. Uh,
I love their process of impounding books. I
oh
love
yeah,
that they would stop books on ships in vessels in the port. They would do the copies and then they would return the copies and keep the originals.
yeah.
It is your
Because
fault for bringing the book to this port to begin with.
yeah, yeah, it's yeah, and that's because logically, like we see with antique stores, you know, old copies of books are more valuable than new copies simply because of the time they have survived. Like, that's just kind of the way things are as far as human nature goes to value things. We value the things that survived longer than the newer version of the exact same thing.
I really would like to hope and imagine in my dreams that they did not discriminate against types of books or documents that they would copy, including people's personal journals. Like, imagine your diary gets seized at the port of entry, and then you get a copy of your diary back, meaning some poor soul has inscribed it entirely back.
Yeah. The library was discerning to a degree. They wanted a published work by a known author. Uh, So they weren't just grabbing every scrap of parchment or paper or papyrus that came through. They were looking. It was a dedicated search and seizure. Uh, and during the golden age of patronage for the library, which is 282 to 145 BCE, this process of seizing books and impounding them gets so bad that that scholars throughout the Mediterranean actively hide their collections whenever an Egyptian ship is in port at their hometown. That's right. They started going to like Carthage and Roman cities and Greek cities and basically going, hello, Syracuse. Hello, Athens. I see you're a well established city with, lots of books and some private scholars and things. We will be taking all their books.
Don't worry, don't worry. We just plan on copying them. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. It got bad that a lot of private scholars would hide from the Egyptian authorities, regardless of where they were, just because they did not want their private collections seized.
I think I would still prefer that over book burnings. Yeah. Admittedly, like, if you're doing it for the greater good.
Yeah. But at the same time, I want my original copy of Hamlet. I do not want to have to give that to the government and receive, a modern reprinting as my compensation prize. One of these books is worth thousands.
Just
the other
glad
is
you
not.
got something back,
comrade. Yes. It's yeah, and so the Ptolemies really do just go about trying to fill this library with books as fast as possible and as much as possible. Yes, Ptolemy the Fifth and Sixth, who collectively rule from 204 to 145, really ramp up everything in the terms of trying to make the library the greatest that ever was or will be. And this is because during this time period, a rival kingdom called the Kingdom of Pergamon has risen to prominence. And Pergamon is a very wealthy, very well-organized city. So much so that when the Germans excavate its archaeological ruins, they straight up abduct the entire settlement and rebuild it in a museum in Berlin.
Really?
The Pergamon Museum in Berlin is the city of Pergamon translocated into a Berlin museum from the foundations up.
That is a testament to German efficiency and engineering. You kind of got to respect it. Yeah. Not good just abducting and colonializing an entire city, but...
And the willingness to learn from Heinrich Schliemann with not opening with dynamite.
It's Heinz Schliemann.
I don't care. He does not get to have his name said right by me. I hate that man.
Yeah, we excavate with dynamite. Yeah.
The man blew up Troy, the ancient and famous city, which, if you're watching the burning of Library of Alexandria, we're just going to assume you know what we mean by the Troy.
Hey, not many people can say they've blown up Troy, okay?
Yeah.
It's a very exclusive list.
Yeah. Agamemnon, Achilles post-mortem, Ajax 2, Odysseus.
I'm just saying, that's a pretty elite list to be a part. Oh, was Schliemann a demigod?
We don't want to find out.
Oh no, is he on a quest from one of the...
I don't want to know what demigod he was the son of, just because it'd be a German god, and the old Germanic gods are freaking vicious.
No, we'll use Percy Jackson laws and rules in that Mount Olympus has moved to the center of power at the time.
That's still not Germany.
It was
anyway,
1910s. They were pretty prosperous.
They were militarized, but anyway, the reason with a lot of this competition was Pergamon has its own library of some 200,000 books that is competing with Egypt's. And this is where a little historical side note, you actually get the invention of parchment. Because in order to starve Pergamon of books, Egypt bans the export of papyrus,
Interesting.
forcing forcing Pergamon to rapidly to heavily invest in the manufacture of parchment, turning it from a niche local writing material to the default for most written works.
That's kind of badass, actually. Like, all right, yeah,
Yeah,
we don't need that. We don't need it.
yeah, yeah. It's like World War II. Japan blocks the U.S. from ever having rubber. U.S. invents fake rubber.
Or Germans
Synthetic rubber.
inventing synthetic air, jet fuel.
Yeah, it's just like it's one of those things like why? I specifically said you couldn't do that. Why? It's just yeah. It gets pretty bad. But anyway, the library does beautifully until 145 BCE. This marks the end of the reign of Ptolemy the Sixth, and with the shift in government here comes a shift in spending away from the library. For you see, the successor to Ptolemy the Sixth, Ptolemy the Eighth, yes, number seven gets skipped over. He was a rebel that Ptolemy the Sixth dealt with.
Oh,
Yeah, there's a lot of family killing going on behind the scenes here, and Ptolemy number eight decides he needs to prioritize away from this already extravagant and very well built up library towards other things in order to stay on the throne. Also, the library, being a center of knowledge, learning, history, and culture, has attracted a lot of non Egyptians and a lot of non Hellenistic people to Alexandria. And Ptolemy the Eighth is a xenophobic asshole.
bye bye.
He is racist as all hell, and he issues, in the first year of his rule, the total expulsion of all foreign scholars from Egypt.
Oh,
This
that's.
includes the head librarian of the Library of Alexandria, the most prestigious institution on planet Earth at the time.
Yeah, but then he goes out and makes it a political appointee, which is no better.
Oh, it's so much worse. Yes, Aristarchus of Samothrace flees to Cyprus, and he's replaced by a political toady whose job is mostly to appease the pharaoh and tell the pharaoh he's right about everything, instead of being a internally appointed scholar who has the respect, wisdom, and body of experience with the library to warrant actively overseeing its collections.
Yeah,
Uh,
nope, not here.
yeah. The library will rapidly begin to decline in importance because of this one rule change.
Not surprised.
Yeah. And it's not a rule that can easily be reversed, so it becomes a pattern because Ptolemy the Eighth, he rules for like 29 years, 145 to 116 BCE. So he's got a long reign to just cement this as what we do now. So there really is no change in this. And now, with sort of the library been set up to fail with it ready to burn. It's just the kindling's been laid there. It's been without funding since 145.
It just
We're
is
gonna get
crazy.
to
It, sorry to interrupt, but it
yeah.
also to me is just crazy about how 2,000 years later, 2,200 years later, there are similar arguments being made now that we should expel foreigners, that we should stop funding libraries and educational
That make
institutes.
make the entire government a political appointee. Yeah, there's all that stuff going on. Fun fact: humans are much the same all over.
It's almost like they don't change throughout history. There are so many parallels. History gone unlearned is destined to repeat itself. That is like
Yeah.
fundamental history 101.
Yeah. And there's a lot of really alarming and depressing parallels between where we are now in America and where all the historical analogies take us. But we won't be
Book
going into
burning.
that. We won't be going into that anymore. Uh, yes. So with that, we're gonna get into all the times the library was destroyed, because the destruction and the burning of this library is one of the more popular mythologies of the ancient world. How this ended. Uh, so there's a lot of people who get credit for destroying the center of knowledge.
At least it's shared blame. You know, everyone does their part.
Yep. First up to the plate is the earliest in terms of chronology and the most famous and most popular claim that people make, and that is that the Library of Alexandria was destroyed by Julius Caesar.
Oh.
Yep. So the year is 48 BC. The cause of destruction in this instance is fire.
Thus the
Now, what?
burning of the library.
Yep, the burning of the library. Now, what has happened? What the reason this happens? All the background around it is that Julius Caesar has pursued his rival Magnus Pompey to Egypt during a Roman civil war. Egypt is also in the midst of a civil dispute, though not outright warfare at this time, between Cleopatra the Seventh and Ptolemy the 13th. They are siblings who have been married to each other despite a significant age gap. Um, I believe it's something like Cleopatra is 19 and Ptolemy is 12.
Oh man.
Uh, so yeah, and they hate each other a lot. So when these Romans start showing up saying, "Hey, we've been fighting the Civil War thing," they both start picking sides. And the Romans are made to take sides in the Egyptian dispute. Namely, Julius Caesar does. Magnus Pompey doesn't get a choice, because the reason Caesar will choose to side with Cleopatra the Seventh and make her Cleopatra, who is so famous and
Oh,
renowned
that
today,
Cleopatra.
it's that
Ooh.
Cleopatra. It's Cleopatra, last of the pharaohs, right here, is because when Pompey Magnus shows up, uh, shortly before Caesar does, Ptolemy the 13th gets it into his head that this is Caesar's enemy. I will make Caesar my ally by killing him brutally, and he will then help me murder my sister.
How old was Ptolemy the 13th at this point?
At this point, Ptolemy 13, no, this would have been uh, 15, maybe 14.
Oh my god. That really it blows me away hearing the age of some people in history, because holy crap, when I was 14, I had some real dumb thoughts.
And this is a really dumb thought for Ptolemy. Because you see,
Wow.
Caesar arrives in Egypt. He arrives in Alexandria. And Ptolemy greets him with the severed head of Magnus Pompey, his former best friend, his brother in law, and the man with whom he is currently at war. Caesar and Pompey may not have gotten along. They may have believed in different things. But Caesar still looked at that and said, "You have murdered a Roman. You have murdered a member of my family." And he immediately turns and backs Cleopatra, uh,
Damn.
the seventh, and overthrows Ptolemy. To do this, Roman soldiers clash with the forces of Ptolemy the 13th in the city of Alexandria. And it is said that during the fight for control of Alexandria, a fire breaks out. Some say it was accidental. Some say Caesar started it on purpose. Some say Ptolemy's people started it in a "if we can't have Egypt, no one can" kind of mentality.
It could have been any of those pretty
Yeah.
easily.
Yeah, no one knows how or why, but in the story, the fire breaks out and it burns the Library of Alexandria to the ground. Um, However, this does not appear to have actually happened. There probably was a fire in the city during the civil war between Cleopatra and Caesar against Ptolemy the 13th. However, um, the library was not destroyed by it. We know this because both the Romans and the Christians mention the library over a century later as just still being there. Things are still happening. Um, Most famously, Plutarch records that Mark Antony donated 200,000 books to the library in 43 BCE as a gift from him to Cleopatra the Seventh.
Yeah, because they was shacking up.
Fun fact: those 200,000 books he looted from the Library of Pergamon.
Oh, that is so beautiful. He's such a romantic. That's how you get back against your enemies. That is how you make allies. This man was a romantic. He was a hero. No, fuck giving ahead of your enemy. No, give your woman books. That is the takeaway. Give your woman books.
To be fair, when she is famous for speaking 7 languages, yes, give her knowledge. That is what this person will value.
I'm just saying, give your woman books. That's the takeaway.
Yeah. But yeah. Yeah. So now, if it wasn't Julius Caesar, as so many people, including, I believe, the people behind Assassin's Creed, like to claim, if it's not him, who is it? Because the library's not there anymore. It's been destroyed. We know it's been destroyed. It's been in the dirt for, over 1,000 years. So who put it there? Someone has to be blamed. So let's look at some of the other candidates. Next up on the list in chronology is another Roman. It is destruction by Emperor Aurelian. The year is 272 CE. So we're a good 300 plus years after Caesar. The cause of destruction is the war between Emperor Aurelian and Queen Zenobia. Now, Queen Zenobia has claimed the city of Alexandria as part of her Palmyrene Empire, which was effectively a city-state that she seized control of. It was a client state of Rome, and she declared, no, we are a fully independent empire. By the way, all of this is ours. Why is it ours? Because we're looking at the tail end of the 3rd century crisis, in which there are more Roman emperors than there are years. It's pretty bad. So basically she says, you've been in a civil war for 50 years. You have had no steady head of state. You've had up to 3 heads of state at one time. We're just out.
That's a pretty solid argument, to be fair.
And we're
when there's that much political instability, it's pretty easy to assume power to break away.
Yeah.
So pretty solid move on her part, in my opinion.
Yeah. One issue with this. She declares that she's out. She declares that she's taking a bunch of pre-existing Roman provinces with her, which includes Egypt, which was a Roman province for over 2 centuries at this point. She's taking all this stuff with her. The only real mistake she makes is that she comes along near the end of the crisis. She declares this against Emperor Aurelian, who, unlike almost everyone who came before him, Aurelian gets in the imperial chair and he makes it stick. He is the restorer of Rome. And he will restore Rome.
Damn.
By marching into the city of Alexandria in 272 and sacking it in order to defeat Queen Zenobia and the Palmyrene Empire. He retakes the city However, the district in which the library is located in is recorded as having suffered heavy damage from the fighting. Um, it is unknown whether the buildings that constituted the library survived this battle. It's also unknown which, if any, of the buildings that made up the library still existed at this time. Because one of the interesting things about the Library of Alexandria is, it wasn't a library like we think of today, one massive building housing all the books. It was more like a college campus. Dozens of buildings, all located fairly close to each other, a few miles apart at most, all of which had the same insignia and were part of the same organization, and each housing a different collection of books based on its specialty. For example, a temple might house more religious works, whereas a more secular building, like an observatory, might house works on astrology and astronomy and things like that. So the library is spread out a little bit. It's not one single building. It's sort of like the University of Chicago, where like you go through the city for like a quarter mile to get from one class to another, and everything in between the two buildings is not belong to the university.
I think you more accurately described UIC than U
UIC.
Chicago.
You're right.
But,
UIC, not U Chicago. I stand corrected. You are right. You're right.
but
Why do
yeah,
we have only two names for universities in this state? It's either Chicago or Illinois.
because we
Name
can't
it
afford the
anything
rest.
else.
The budget won't
I
allow.
beg you.
But yeah, they became library districts where every building contributed and had some aspect of it like a university campus. So, and my thought on a lot of this is that it probably did just suffer death by 1,000 cuts. There probably were buildings that got damaged, that were burning, aspects of the library that were suffering or may have had some damage. I just think it's the years of lack of funding that really did her in.
Yeah. It's not been at this point, at the time of Emperor Aurelian, the library has not received consistent attention or major funding in, a truly meaningful way in 417 years.
Oh, that's it. That's
Yeah.
a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, it's nothing. But yeah, so we have Julius Caesar, we have Emperor Aurelian, literally the golden one. The next claim for destruction is a much smaller gap than Caesar to Aurelian. That is destruction by Diocletian. The year is 297 CE, and Diocletian, and the cause of death for this one is urban redevelopment.
God damn you, urban planners!
Yeah.
You stupid architects!
Diocletian comes in 20 years after the battle to retake Alexandria, and he says, what would be a good sign that we have, restabilized the Roman Empire? Would be if I bulldozed about a third of this city and rebuilt it like a modern city in the glory of Rome.
Dude, I bet you came in there like a pissed off parent, like, this is how you guys have been living? This place is a mess. You haven't rebuilt in 20 years? No. We're going to start all over. Let's just clear the palette, let's start from fresh, and let's build it right. And I bet you just came in there, had a steam, just nose to the grind wheel. Let's go.
Yeah. So, death by gentrification here.
Urban renewal, you bastard.
Yeah, I hate that. Now, the area that Diocletian chooses to clear and rebuild is most likely the one that contained the library. Fun fact, we don't appear to actually have, or at least when looking at sources and looking at things, we don't appear to really have the master plan that he was working from. So we're not really sure which parts of the city he bulldozed, but we think it was the library district.
I'm curious to see what archaeology work has been done, because that would be kind of interesting to see if they have found portions that may have been part of it.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that does complicate that a little bit is by the time Diocletian does this, Alexandria is no longer a center of knowledge and learning. Uh, that's more of like the legacy of what we once were, sort of like Chicago being the classic mob town with Al Capone type gangsters.
You could also just use the stockyards as a good example, because we are no longer the butcher capital of the world, but for a very long time, Chicago stockyards provided most meats.
Yeah, yeah, that also true. Yeah, people know the gangsters better. See.
Yeah, but I gotta stay true to my Chicago heritage.
Uh-huh. But yeah, so it's more like that. It's more like, it's Alexandria is this old guy going, back in my day, we were the greatest center of learning on earth.
Shut up,
and
Grandpa.
Rome is going, okay, Grandpa, let's get you to bed.
You kids don't know how good you got it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's possible that, Aurelian did destroy what was left of the library. It's possible that some of the buildings were still standing and Diocletian just destroyed them because they were no longer particularly useful. We don't rightfully know. But there's a few more claims, next of which is one of the fun ones because it's a double header. And that is another very popular claim that often gets mixed in with the Julius Caesar one anachronistically. And that is destruction by Christians. As with the mythologizing of the death of the Library of Alexandria, of its burning, it kind of gets set up that 48 years before Christians were invented by the concept of Jesus Christ, the Christians, in an angry religious mob with Julius Caesar, burned the Library of Alexandria to the ground. That's a fun thing that happens in a lot of sort of how people remember what happened.
Yeah.
It's not all what happened. It physically cannot happen. It's one of those weird things like saying Moses had a DVD collection.
No, clearly he had a VHS collection, but the point still stands.
Yeah. So it's one of those weird things where stuff gets combined that really shouldn't, because it's almost everything we're going through here is stories with a little bit of truth behind them, and ending with, and then of course they destroyed the Library of Alexandria. And that line at the end is usually the part that's false.
Yeah.
And they all just kind of get combined and mashed together as people try to figure out what exactly happened, at least in the popular imagination.
But the Christians really did have a habit of going in, sacking things, burning it to the ground, and then just moving along their merry little ways. So, it's not unrealistic for that to be conflated with the story of the Romans who did similar things.
Yeah. Both had both had similar tolerance issues with each other. But the Christians in this point will destroy it either in 391 or 415 CE. Christianity is very powerful at this point. It has become more or less the national religion of the Roman Empire. And the cause of destruction here is civil unrest between the Christians and other religious sects in Alexandria. In 391, we get probably the most credible source for the final destruction of the Library of Alexandria, which is the bishop Theophilus of Alexandria oversees the destruction of the Temple of Serapis. Now, the Temple of Serapis had housed a part of the collection from the Library of Alexandria. It was one of those buildings that had been a part of the library complex. And Theophilus is hell-bent on basically demolishing it because it's a pagan temple. And he wants to put a Christian church there because the Christians are a newly empowered and very strong sect in Alexandria. They've been clashing with the locals since 313.
And the Christians, for their credit, really enjoyed putting their own house of worship on the location of previous houses of worship as a way to both influence but also borrow from that validity a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's an
Yeah.
homage but also a power thing where it's like you can no longer worship here. If you continue to worship, you must join our worship.
Yeah. 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 There's a famous example with Christians going into Scandinavia and encountering the oak tree of Odin and going, well, if Odin's really a powerful god and better than my god, surely he would stop me from taking this axe and chopping down his sacred, 900-year-old oak tree. And they chopped down a 900-year-old oak tree in the center of this town just to prove a point.
I mean, in Mexico, they would build them on top of temples and pyramids. So,
Yeah.
take it.
Yeah. Yeah. Just figured it was time for a new analogy right here. A new example for our audience. But
So this is the last example of a permanent building of the Library of Alexandria being destroyed.
Yeah, and it is unclear whether any works from the library remained inside at this time. It seems to have largely given up its status as a library post and had sort of regressed back to simply being a religious site and a temple, as opposed to a religious site and repository of religious texts.
Really sad that one of the most predominant houses of knowledge was relegated to such a low level in such a short time.
Yeah. At this point, it has been 536 years since the buildings have received funding.
Exactly. Imagine what they would be if they still received funding.
Yeah.
We should fund our libraries.
Yeah. Now, the temple was destroyed because it was a non-Christian temple in an increasingly Christian area. And the other excuse that's often given when talking about it as the Library of Alexandria being the, destruction of the library and all that, is that the real reason the Christians wanted to destroy it was because the library preached diversity and inclusivity in terms of scholarship and religion and, all that stuff, and the Christians wanted to destroy that harmful idea.
Man, how things are cyclical.
Yeah, so you can see a little bit of propaganda mixed in with the truth here when the destruction of this temple gets blown into the proportion of the burning of the whole Library of Alexandria. This was a religiously motivated, small-scale demolition that was very targeted in its scope.
Crazy.
Still, it is the last known building we have of yes, this building was a part of the library, and it was destroyed here. The library had ceased to exist, but the building was still standing. Yay, I guess.
Containing portions of the former collection.
It's unclear whether or not there were any part of the collection remaining.
Unfortunate.
The Christians who were pulling it down stone by stone didn't exactly go inside to check it out and make sure everything was, as it should be. It was more of a scream heathens into the wind and throw your torches at it kind of movement.
Bastards.
Yeah. The other example of Christians destroying the Library of Alexandria is the 415 CE murder of Hypatia of Alexandria. Hypatia was a female mathematician who was hunted down and murdered for witchcraft by a Christian mob in the streets of Alexandria in 415 CE. This is a real event. She's a real person. This really happened to her. Her murder was so brutal that even the contemporary Christian writers in and around Alexandria wrote of what a tragedy it was that this had to happen.
Jeez.
She was a pagan, she was a woman, and she was allowed to more or less give guest lectures under the guidance of her father, a man named Theon, who is typically hailed as the last head librarian of the Library of Alexandria.
So she's this last connection to this great thing.
Yeah. The story goes that her father had let her speak on philosophy and mathematics, and in response, on the way home, she was ripped from her chariot and beaten to death in the streets.
Ooh.
Um, she is beaten to death very violently. A number of sources do describe the violence. We will not. And universally, everyone weeps for her death because she was considered intelligent. She was considered kind. She was the most popular political figure in Alexandria at the time. She is said to have had the ear a of the Roman administrator, and the real motivation for her murder, rather than being the fact that she's a woman teaching, which is already a problem for Christians at this time, was the fact that the bishop in Alexandria felt that she had more influence over the Roman governor than he did.
Ooh,
And
jealousy.
it was wrong for a woman, and a pagan at that, to have more say in public affairs than a Christian leader.
Ooh, that just doesn't sit right.
That is the logic that was applied to to this. That was the motivation for her murder, and that is what happened. Now, it's unclear if Theon, her father, had anachronistically declared himself head librarian of Alexandria, or if that title was maybe given to him by later sources and writers, or if there still was a Library of Alexandria in some greatly reduced form, and Theon, her father, is the last known instance of someone attempting to run the institute.
Truly the last of a long line.
Yeah,
Ooh.
yeah. Following her murder, the story goes that the library was then sacked and burned as a punishment by the hand of God for allowing a woman to speak to a man.
How dare she? That's so
You know,
fucking ridiculous, man.
this is
I know this was almost 2,000 years ago, but that's so fucking ridiculous.
yeah, it is absolute bullshit. All the reasons why she died, all the justification for anything that comes after, all the reasoning around it is just it's just wrong. It's just awful. It's very interesting in like a you know stories of horrible ways people have died kind of horror train, but not really anything beyond that.
I mean, it just shows the power and influence of the church, one, and two, just how hypocritical they could be at times. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's horrible. And even though we've seen the destruction of the last building that is known to have any connection to the Library of Alexandria, and the death of the last people who are known to have any connection to the Library of Alexandria, there's still one more contender for who destroyed the Library of Alexandria.
Another contender enters the arena. Dun,
Yep,
dun, 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 dun,
yep.
dun.
A new challenger approaches. This one is destruction by Arab Muslims. That's right. The jihadists did it.
Oh, let's not go there.
Yeah. That's the claim, and it is absolute freaking bullshit. Like, it is more bullshit than the reasons why we see Hypatia of Alexandria get killed just a few seconds ago. Uh, so the story goes, the year is 641 CE. The Library of Alexandria has been without funding for 786 years. The cause of destruction is the invasion of Egypt by the Muslim Arabs. In 641, the Caliph Umar has taken the city of Alexandria, and he orders the burning of the library on this logic. If any of the works of the library agree with the Quran, they are superfluous vanities that must be destroyed to preserve the purity of the Quran. If the library contains any works that do not agree with the Quran, they are heretical abominations and must be destroyed.
I just love the casual dropping of superfluous. You know,
Yeah.
the potent terms there. Whether it's that again, it's a little bit of that hypocritical logic of, you know, if you agree with me, well then you are clearly taking the Lord in vain. If you disagree, well then you are a heretic and you must be punished for it.
Yeah. And the reason why this is so much bullshit isn't just the idiotic logic that gets applied here, but also the fact that Caliph Umar never said that. He never did that. He didn't even know there was supposed to be a library in Alexandria. What happened is that in the 13th century, 600 years after Umar invaded Egypt, the Christians are at war with the Muslims over the Holy Land. And this story gets invented to demonize the Arabs and provide further justification for the Christians to continue their invasion, because not only are these people heretical, they destroy all knowledge. So clearly, it is God's will that we must wage a bloody campaign of death and destruction against civilians. You know, usual medieval times crap.
All shall pay under God's patronage, you know?
Yeah. Now, the one good thing about this story is even by the 18th century, everyone knew it was fake. It's been regarded as a hoax since the 18th century, so it doesn't get told as much as the Julius Caesar story or the Christians with Julius Caesar story, which is still my favorite combo meal for the burning of Library of Alexandria, just because of how little sense it makes and how much wrong is packed into it.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, it's pretty hilariously bad. So we've gone through all these different ways that people have claimed the Library of Alexandria has ended. Supposedly, it has been destroyed 6 times.
At least.
Yeah, 6 times. 3 by Romans, twice by Christians, once by Muslims. So, what actually happened? All these accounts can't be right. Can they all be wrong?
I think it's all of the above. I think it's D. I think every little bit of it contributed except for the hoax.
Yep. Yeah. So, here's what we're able to piece together from the actual historical documents, since unfortunately the archaeological evidence can't give us as clear of a picture, but the documents do state things over. And the reason the archaeological evidence can't give us as clear as a picture is because this city gets sacked a couple times around the same time that it's supposed to be destroyed. So when we look at the destruction, we don't know if we're looking at part of the destruction of Library of Alexandria or just another part of the city that got hit by some disaster.
It's also important to note that it still continues to be a city, so there's also continued development on top of it. So you just kind of
we can't just clear out several million people and dig there for a couple years. That's not how this works.
Hey guys, how would you like an all-inclusive vacation?
Yeah. So what we do know for a fact is after 145 BCE, the patronage in the library sharply declined. The quality of academic upkeep dramatically fell off following the expulsion of foreign scholars, also in 145 BCE. Patronage by later Ptolemaic pharaohs and Roman emperors was sporadic at best. Inconsistent spending would have prevented proper maintenance of the facilities and allowed them to sort of wallow in a increasingly distressing amount of disrepair. The only known Roman patrons, so the only people who actually put money into this following the death of Cleopatra VII in the 30s BCE are Emperor Claudius, who rules from 41 to 54 CE, and Emperor Hadrian, who rules from 117 to 138. Which means that since the library has survived Julius Caesar, the last time anyone spent money on it would have been 138 CE, which is 140 years before the next instance of someone claiming to have destroyed it occurs.
I think it's also to potentially highlight too that even if part of it was destroyed under Caesar, it probably would have been rebuilt or maybe just readjusted where they relocated some of the works.
Yeah.
So like there is certain validity that could be stated that some aspects may have been destroyed or rebuilt by this point, especially if there are patrons adding to it. But yeah, 140 years till the next destruction. Let's go, drum roll.
Yeah. So, additionally, the library is written about in both early Christian sources as well as some Roman ones, indicating that it has survived to the Roman Empire, along with the fact that we have the emperors actively giving money to it about once every other dynasty. uh, Religious intolerance following the rise of Christianity would have driven further scholars from the library, resulting in more decay, assuming the library has lasted that long. The simple fact of convert or die going around would have driven a lot of academics who would have been from any religious background out of the town. And by the 7th century, there is no evidence that any semblance of a library existed for Caliph Umar to destroy.
So at least we have a bookend there of potentially where the
Yeah.
last known date is.
Yeah. So, from all of this, we're able to roughly gather that the final cause of death is time. Library has been left to decay for centuries. Bit by bit, its buildings and its works would have fallen into disrepair. As they fall into disrepair, those various buildings would have been reclaimed by the city, building by building, wing by wing, annex by annex, would have been torn down or converted into something more immediately useful to the needs of the city at the time than just a dilapidated old former library building that almost no one probably goes into.
It's crazy how that parallel from 2,000 years ago is still pretty prevalent in today's society, especially in a lot of Rust Belt cities across the U.S., where you see this exact same process of urban decay, the process of it falling apart, crumbling, basically going to a point where it just needs to be demolished. And then you see this urban renewal, this gentrification, like you said earlier, this revitalization of these areas. It basically is the natural lifespan of the city. And unfortunately, we pretty much can assume that this is what happened with the library. I just, personally, I kind of hope that some of the works are out there somewhere yet to be discovered, but I know that's a fanciful hope and that's really unrealistic, especially with how many people came into the city afterwards that would have been very keen on destruction of intellect, being the Christians, being the Muslims, being the Romans at certain points, were very academic. So it's a tragedy of time, and I think it's important that we highlight it.
Yeah. Yeah, and basically the process continues until there's nothing left. The final few buildings, like the Temple of Serapis, had for a good period of time ceased to function as libraries before their destruction. Temple of Serapis isn't destroyed because it's part of the Library of Alexandria. There is no Library of Alexandria. It's destroyed because it's worshiping a god of the quote unquote wrong religion according to the currently fanatical religious power of the, late 4th century there.
Just some good old religious erasure.
Yep. So, it's time. There is no burning of the Library of Alexandria. It's, there's this human need almost to believe that these great and glorious things die in these glorious, fiery, epic deaths, that the conclusion of this grand life is in itself a crescendo. And it's not.
In
They
reality,
fade
it's
away.
in
They
reality
die.
it's political. It's disinvesture. It's
Yeah.
this disinterest in academics, and it's really a tragedy because we see that library, that system, as one of the peaks of humanity, one of humanity's greatest accomplishments, one of their greatest achievements. This bank of knowledge, and the destruction, the loss of it is too significant to manifest in a way that it was just forgotten about, no longer cared about, no longer funded. It's just this coping mechanism that people have. But yeah, that's an interesting topic. That's one that I thought was kind of a cool
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Just it just fades away. Its resources were spent, its strength had left it, and the world had declared that it no longer had a need for it, a purpose. And without a purpose, there was nothing that could be done to stop the library from ceasing to exist. It was sustained by people caring about it. And just the sad truth is, people stopped caring about it, whether because of religious intolerance or xenophobia or the Roman obsession with fighting yourself repeatedly. It, people stopped paying attention. And by the time humanity turned and looked back and said, where was this glorious thing?
It was
There
long
wasn't
back.
even sand left to mark where it had been. The city had built over it, and over it, and over it a dozen times.
Well, I think that's a great point for us to wrap up on that very poetic little soliloquy. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, let us know down below, and we'll see you in the next one.